Hi, I'm Jenna. Welcome to my channel and welcome to the inside of my 165 square foot tiny house. This video is a continuation of my partnership with Airbnb, where I'm showing you some of the most unique rentals around the country. And it just so happens that I own one myself. So today I'm going to take you on a mini tour of my tiny house and also talk about my experience as an Airbnb host. So let's get started. So my history with tiny houses goes back to 2013 when I actually built this one myself with the help of friends and family. I've always said that a tiny house is like a tool. It should work for your lifestyle. It should work to benefit you in some way. So when I first built the tiny house, it benefited me in the way that I didn't have to pay rent anymore in Los Angeles, and I could travel around with my home attached. I lived in this tiny house for 3 years. When it was time for me to move on, I thought it would be really cool to open this tiny house on Airbnb. I could continue to keep it, I could have a vacation home of my own, I can share it with other people, and it can also provide me with a little extra income to do some fun things either here at the Airbnb itself or back at my tiny cottage that I have in Seattle. So in 2017, that's what I did. I moved this tiny house onto a really amazing farm on Whidbey Island in Washington. It's basically created a business not just for me, but also for the farm owners. We split the revenue and they do the turnover for me, so they get the cleaning fee as well. When I want to, I come out here and I use the tiny house myself. It's my little oasis in the woods on an island, and what more could you ask for? Whidbey Island is in the Puget Sound, just about an hour away from Seattle. So in order to get here, you have to take a ferry. It's kind of part of the experience. I think it's fun for a lot of people, especially those trying to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Welcome inside of my tiny house. This space right here is multiple rooms. It kind of has to be inside of a tiny house. So this is a living room, this is a dining room, and this is a spare bed. Normally it's couples that are renting my tiny house, but sometimes they bring a kid or a third friend along with them. So when that happens, this futon here turns into the third bed. In this configuration, we are in the living room, and basically it's seating for two or a third person with these ottomans. It can also be the dining room pretty easily by folding down a table, and then you have a dining room table seating for 2 or 3 people. I also have a couple of tray tables here in case people don't really want to take down the whole table. They just want to have a quick meal in front of the projector. So I have a 60-inch projection screen. Right here is a DVD player, and the projector is up above. I'm kind of a movie buff, so I'm always growing my DVD collection. I think it's a nice thing that you're able to do in a tiny house in the middle of the woods, watch a movie on the big screen. So that's something I enjoy doing, and it's something I wanted to make sure that my guests could do when they come out here. So one of the centerpieces of my tiny house is my wood-burning stove. This is maybe the most expensive thing that I put inside of my tiny house. I love it though. I think it creates such an awesome ambiance. I lived in Colorado for a whole ski season in my tiny house, so this was a necessity. Here in Washington, it doesn't get that cold, but I find that my guests really love it because it just creates a really cozy ambiance here. So this is the kitchen in my tiny house. I made sure when I was building it that I did a galley kitchen, and the reason for that is because I wanted to be able to use both sides. Someone could be cooking over here, someone could be cutting over there, and so a galley kitchen I thought was the best use of space. My countertops are alligator juniper wood. I actually hollowed them out so that they weren't super heavy. Now it gives me an extra joy because this juniper wood is what I actually named my daughter, who was born on January 1st, so just a few months ago. In the tiny house, there's a 3-burner stove, propane. There's a 3-way fridge. It's powered by either propane, DC, or AC, and it has a little freezer in it. I'm connected to the electricity here on the farm. I'm just using the electrical portion of the refrigerator, which is really energy efficient actually. Over here is the only sink in my entire tiny house. I know some people think that they need a sink in their bathroom and also in their kitchen, but my bathroom's right here and my kitchen's right here, so it's really not a big deal, and I didn't want to have to do the extra plumbing when I was building the tiny house. I wanted to keep everything really simple. So basically I have a sink here, and behind this wall is my shower, and that made plumbing really simple. My hot water heater is underneath it. I made this cupboard out of an old crate, and same thing that I made my staircase out of. So just little touches like that I think people think are really cool. I have copper piping in different places throughout the tiny house. This one is used mainly for dish rags, but I used copper piping for my curtain rods in the front of the tiny house and for a really cool light fixture that is in the very middle of my tiny house. Let me take you back into the bathroom. Back here is my bathroom, and it's really tiny because this is a tiny house. So basically there's only room for a toilet and a shower, and yes, a tiny tub. I don't think anybody ever actually uses it for bathing. I put it in here mainly so that I can wash my dog. Otherwise, it's a pretty simple little bathroom. I did a stainless steel siding. It's actually roofing for the interior walls. That was mainly just to save on cost and weight because I was traveling around with my tiny house. When you're in the shower, you can actually magnetize the shower curtain to the walls so that it doesn't shrink wrap you when you're taking a shower, which is a big bonus. The other interesting thing about my bathroom is that there's a composting toilet. And I put a composting toilet in for a couple reasons, mainly for flexibility and parking, which I'm really glad that I did now because the farm where I'm parked doesn't have sewer piped out to where I am in the middle of the woods. So I wouldn't be able to have a regular flush toilet out here even if I wanted to. For my guests who aren't used to using a composting toilet, I've included a manual with some fun imagery. Mostly cartoons, don't worry. So it pretty much tells you how to use it. It's only so long because I liked to include a lot of information for people who are interested in getting a composting toilet for themselves. To learn how to use a composting toilet, the information is right here. Just 4 simple steps. Some nice light reading while you're maybe using the composting toilet. Probably the coolest parts of my tiny house, at least I think, is my storage staircase. And I kind of call it like a hidden staircase because a lot of people don't know that it's a staircase when they first come into my tiny house. That's because it serves multiple purposes. It's also a display area for some of my favorite things, like some drawings and paintings that people have done over the years for me. When you live in a tiny house, people like to paint you tiny pictures. I also like to have some stuff in here for my guests to do while they're out here. One of the things I have in here is called the Tiny House Novel. Basically, I started it. I wrote a story, chapter 1, and then people have added to it. And so I like to come here and see. You can see they've used different pens, and it's a continuation of the story. Some people have drawn images in here. So it's kind of fun to see where people are taking the story. Sometimes people take it to a dark place, but it's still funny. Paint markers, so people outside have been painting rocks. It's kind of a fun way to pass the time when you're out here. This compartment I call Narnia, so it's sort of a surprise. I think people probably get a kick out of it. But when you open up here, what you'll find is a miniature version of the tiny house that you're staying in. I also give everybody who stays here a free sticker so they can find it inside of the compartment called Narnia. Down here is my game drawer, so I have a lot of different board games. I'm a big board game person, so I made sure to keep that collection going. And then my DVD collection, including a DVD of how this tiny house was made because it was featured on HGTV. And so I have my HGTV episode here if people want to do a very meta thing and watch how the tiny house that they're staying in was made. But most of all, this staircase is used as a way to get up to the loft. This is the loft of my tiny house. I have a queen size bed, so 2 people can sleep up here. It has plenty of headroom, at least for me and most people under 6 feet tall. My favorite part is probably the skylight because I love looking up at the stars at night. I also have 5 windows up here, so you get plenty of cross ventilation. It's kind of serene because we're up in the trees up here and feels a little bit like a tree house. One of the most important parts of any rental is having a really cool manual. Since this is a tiny house, I made sure to include a lot of things about the interesting and somewhat unique items inside of my tiny house, like how to fold down the table, how to fold out the bed. And then I also included my tiny house story in case anyone was interested in reading about why I built this tiny house and how I used it. One of my favorite things to do when I come to my tiny house is read the guest book. There are some really interesting entries in here and some really fun and heartwarming ones as well. So every time I come here, I can barely stand it. The minute I get into the house, I open it up and I read a message from my last guest. This is from Jada and Caleb. They were traveling from Phoenix, Arizona. And they said, "We absolutely adored our stay here. We have been researching tiny living for the past couple years, and this was our dream stay. It inspired us for our future tiny endeavors. Thank you so much for sharing this space. It's magical." People have come here and actually proposed to their loved one. People come here and celebrate their birthdays, their anniversaries. They want to come here and they want to have that special moment here. And that was really surprising to me. So because we're on a working farm with chickens and turkeys and sheep and of course vegetables, another thing that we offer our guests is fresh eggs and fresh produce. So you can order those for an additional charge if you want. We call these the rainbow eggs. They're here from Sweetwater Farm. They do a great job of making sure to give you a variety of colors. And I really enjoy this myself when I come to stay because I swear the blue ones taste the best. Another item that I include in the tiny house is a map of the trails around the property. It's a 20-acre farm in the woods. There's a yurt about 500 feet away, and it's also an Airbnb. So when families or groups of friends come out and the tiny house is just too small, they're able to rent both, enjoy a little bit of privacy, but also have the experience of being together if you have a little bit of a larger group. So you can see my tiny house there and the trail that you can walk around the property. So one of my favorite places in my tiny house is actually not inside of my tiny house, it's outside. I love my new porch. This does not travel with the tiny house. This is something that my husband and I built to extend the living space outside. So we also have a macrame swing, we have a fire pit. This is probably one of my favorite places to sit in the morning, watch the birds on the bird feeder, have a cup of coffee, and just enjoy being in the woods. Finally, this is my giant hammock. This tiny house is connected to me in many different ways, and basically every piece of it is a little piece of me, so I enjoy sharing that. I don't think I ever expected people to be as inspired by the space as they are. And it just makes me feel really good because this space continues to give, even though I no longer live in it full time, it continues to give an opportunity and it continues to bring joy to others. And that brings me joy.